So I am Leora Berman. I'm the CEO and founder of the Land Between charity, who is hosting Carrie Gunson of Eco-Kare International in this session today. There's a lovely picture of Carrie there. The Land Between charity runs the Turtle Guardians program. The Turtle Guardians program is the arm that does all kinds of mitigation and community science to help turtles, our shelled friends. And we have been funded by Ganawenan Mishkiki, which is the Eastern Georgian Bay initiative that is looking after turtles in the Eastern Georgian Bay watershed. We'd like to recognize that we're coming to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, and specifically the Mississauga and Michisagi nation within the greater Ojibwe Anishinaabe Nation. We recognize the original treaties that formed Canada, and these treaties talked about sharing the land equally. They did not talk about sharing the water with equal authority without molesting or interfering one another. We recognize Indigenous people as our brethren, and the reason we were able, as European settlers or settlers in general, to settle this country, and we are very grateful for their generosity and tolerance and friendship that is recognized in these original treaties. The Land Between extends from Georgian Bay coast to the Ottawa Valley. It is central in Ontario as an ecotone. So this is the location in the headwaters of the Mississauga-Michisagi Anishinaabe territory. The Land Between has the largest shoreline to area percentage, or the percentage of shoreline to area in the province of Ontario. It also has primarily or the most rock barrens. And so who likes rocks and who likes water? Well, turtles and reptiles in general. Ectotherms need to bask, and many of them are highly aquatic. And so the Land Between itself is a final refuge, one of three main areas where as a refuge for turtles in Ontario, and that's why we are concerned with helping turtles. Not just because it's a refuge, but because turtles are such unique species. So for anyone who is new to herpetology or turtle biology on this call, I'd like to take a minute to tell you why these species are so important. First of all, turtles are keystone species, meaning they hold up entire ecosystems. Without turtles in aquatic ecosystems, those ecosystems and habitats, their functions, and all the species related to those habitats would suffer. So wetlands are home to, or wetlands have important life cycle functions or represent important life cycle functions for about 70% of Ontario's fish and wildlife. They are as dynamic in other parts of the world. Without turtles functioning in these habitats and in our environment, wetlands will degrade, and all the species that rely on them. Turtles are highly imperiled across the world. About 2/3 of turtle species or chelonian species are at risk in the world. Their populations are declining, and there are many reasons for that. Turtles in general have very low recruitment rates, so it takes them a very long time to replace themselves in nature. They mature very late, and the success of their offspring is quite low. We estimate, given all the data, that it takes approximately 60 years for one turtle to be replaced naturally in the environment. Adult turtles will still lay eggs for the entirety of their adulthood, and this could be hundreds of years, according to amazing research by Dr. Ron Brooks in Algonquin Park, who estimates that snapping turtles, for instance, could live up more than 200 years. And so at a very low recruitment rate, we need those adult turtles to continue laying and producing offspring in order for populations to be stable. Roads and road mortality is a major threat to turtles in Ontario and much of North America for freshwater turtles. And so this is why we're hosting this session. It is imperative that we reduce the mortality of these adult turtles that stabilize populations. And thus we have worked with Carrie Gunson, who's just a wonderful expert in all road ecology, wildlife on roads, to bring you this session. The other things we do in terms of turtle recovery and to help turtles is we engage in citizen science, or community science as it's now known. And so we have programs such as nest sitters, wetland watchers, researchers to help us gather data, and they are frontline mitigation. They're a frontline mitigation source, I suppose. So having people who are patrolling roads, actively moving turtles off roads when it's safe to do so is excellent mitigation as well. We've also been piloting our own underpass projects or exclusion jump out fencing projects. Carrie will touch on those as well. And we have been piloting awareness projects as well, such as these billboards. The way we fund a lot of this, besides with the Eastern Georgian Bay Initiative and some federal grants, is through our calendar sales. So I encourage everyone to take a look at the Turtle Guardians website and purchase your Turtle Guardians calendar. This is the 2022 calendar. Every calendar each year has a theme, and this year is blockbuster movies. So we take all our ambassador turtles and we put them in really cool movie scenes, and they're a lot of fun. And they're great companions to have by your desk while you're working. And they're very inspiring, and they help us pay for our road mitigation projects. So I'd like to give you a quick guide to what's going to happen during this webinar. So the poll that I've launched, if you still can see the poll, please answer the poll just to tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and what your background is. Carrie will be giving you the agenda that we're going to go through, and we're going to have breaks throughout this. And during those breaks, Carrie will be posting brainstorming questions. When you answer those questions, if you'd like to answer those questions or have ideas to share or solutions to share, please put those in the chat. You will notice at the bottom there's a chat box, and that's very different than the question and answer box. The Q&A box is for questions you'd like Carrie to answer during or after this session. So you are welcome to pose questions anytime during this session, but during those brainstorming breaks, please put the comments in the chat box. So please note the difference. In terms of the questions and answers, the entire audience can see those questions and answers. If you feel there's a question that's more important or you'd like Carrie to address first, you can vote up that question. So you can vote that you like that question or would like that question to be answered. So please go to that. We will do our best to go through all the highest ranking questions during this webinar, but we would like to answer all the questions. So if we can't get those questions answered today, Carrie and I will endeavor to go through the questions and send you the questions and answers in a document after this webinar. So in addition to that document with the Q&A answers, we're going to send you a follow-up email that has this recording. In the email, you'll see a questionnaire as well. This is an opportunity for us to learn from you in terms of what your experience is, where your obstacles, what you think the obstacles are to mitigation for reptiles and roads and other species. It's also for those who are not involved directly in mitigation to express your concerns and to help alert us to different areas of concern. So please fill out the questionnaire, and we will also have the brainstorming questions in that questionnaire for you to answer then if you do not feel comfortable answering during this webinar. Please keep your eye out as well. In the next 2 months, we will have a video production on turtle road threat mitigation, and that's also going to be led by Carrie Gunson. So this is a canned video that can be sent to different jurisdictions to help them understand the needs, the aspects, the technicalities, and the specifications to help reduce threats to turtles on roads. We also anticipate having more grassroots workshops in the field. So this is maintenance workshops where we maintain exclusion fencing, other training workshops as well, and more interactive webinars. If you would like to stay in touch with us about all these tools and resources coming up, within the email questionnaire, please just click yes that you'd like to stay in touch, and we will send you updates on all those materials as well as the research that we're doing. So I would like to introduce Carrie Gunson. Carrie started Eco-Kare International in response to the growing need to mitigate road impacts on Ontario's reptiles and larger mammals. Although originally from Ontario, she began working in the field of road ecology in Banff National Park, Alberta, from about 1999 to 2005. Banff now has 6 wildlife overpasses and 38 large animal underpasses, and these structures are being implemented on provincial roads in both British Columbia and Alberta. Carrie started working with amphibians in Banff, then moved to upstate New York, where she became acquainted with amphibians and reptiles in Eastern North America. Carrie specializes in designing, installing, maintaining, and monitoring wildlife mitigation systems in Ontario and elsewhere. Carrie has installed over 10 kilometers of exclusion fence for reptiles and has participated in many grassroots projects. She is here today to share with us some of her most formative experiences in road ecology from the last 10 years of monitoring work conducted along Highway 69 from Port Severn to Sudbury. Today's presentation will focus on hands-on maintenance and adaptive management needs along Highway 69, but that's the experience from our last webinar, but she's going to focus on, and she'll tell you soon, on how-tos, do's and don'ts, and best management practices for designing, implementing, as well as maintaining infrastructure to mitigate threats to turtles on roads. Carrie, take it away.
All right, can you hear me, Leora?
Yeah.
This will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to continue? So I'm going to start sharing.
Yes, please.
And then I'm going to my PowerPoint. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm going to start from the beginning. And you can see that, Leora?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
For participants, if they're not muted now, please mute yourselves. Thank you so much.
Right. So my name is Carrie. It's not Leora as it says in the screen here. I had to sign in through Leora's account, Land Between account for technical sharing of screens. And so here I am, and there's a lot of slides to go through. So I'm going to maybe move fast. This is being recorded, so you guys can come back to anything and watch it at a later time. So this entire project, all these series of workshops and webinars and the field day we had is being funded by the Eastern Georgian Bay Initiative. And so we will start with talking about roads and reptiles for about 10 minutes. It's already 1:15, so we will be a little behind on these times throughout the presentation, and we may go over the 3 o'clock. And so if you have to leave, you have to leave. As I said, it will be recorded, so you can come back later. There's a lot to cover. We're trying to brush through all the aspects and of a road mitigation strategy for turtles and reptiles in general. But really there could be a 2-hour workshop on each one of these components. So as a background, Canada has 8 species of freshwater turtles. All of them are at risk. If you look up in the threat documents, in the CASARO and COSOEC documents, you will see that road mortality is a threat for all 7 of these species. And why is that for 7 of the 8 species? Then the 8th one is simply because it doesn't come out of water as much as the other 7 species do to come up to nest. So turtles freeze in response to a threat. So if you've ever seen them on a road when you drive by, if you're watching them nest on a road, you will see that the turtle will pause when a car drives by, and it will pause for a pretty lengthy amount of time until it feels that the threat is gone. So when that happens, another car can, if a first car misses it, the second car might get it because it hasn't seen it, or most of the cars aren't aware of turtles on the roads in the first place. They also come up to nest on roads, perfect habitat for them. They're up higher, roads can be up higher, vertical alignment to the lower wetland habitat. It's perfect for the sun to incubate their eggs. They also don't have vegetation on roads, generally speaking. And so they come up and nest there. And then we have snakes, and snakes are plentiful species in Canada. And I will come back to these reasons why Actually, I'll go through that now. Snakes are killed on roads because they come up to thermoregulate on roads, and you can often see them just laying still on a road. They are intentionally run over. They blend in with the asphalt surface. Smaller snakes are obviously more difficult to observe on roads. They're moving fast across roads. You might not see them. And longer, slender bodies are longer than turtles. So the probability of tires striking the length of a snake body is higher than other animals. This came out just the other day. Put together document looking at the threat assessments for snakes in Canada. And in that document, I think there was 25 species of snakes in Canada, and road mortality was listed as a threat for 23 of these species. We're going to talk about snakes a little more throughout, but we're primarily focusing on turtles. And this is because we know more actually for turtles, for what works for turtles. Snakes and mitigation, where are we at with this taxa? Well, we know that reptiles are cold-blooded, and that is difficult to get them to go through underpasses in the first place. They're colder, and we've actually looked at passage rates and compared between turtles and snakes, and we find that snakes are more reluctant to go into these colder underpass structures, even more so than turtles. So snakes seem to go in and turn around at a higher rate than turtles do. They're difficult to monitor, same with turtles, because they're cold-blooded, but snakes even more so, because at the entrance of the structure where you have your camera, they are moving around in many different directions, more exploratory, and you don't know if they went through or if they turned around, because they kind of disappear, especially when you have water or rocks under there trying to make them pass underneath the camera. Exclusion fence, snakes are able to poke through. They have slender bodies. The smaller, slender snakes are able to poke through the mesh style fences that we have. Snakes are able to find gaps and joins and fencing that have separated a little bit with the environment, the road environment. Sometimes exclusion fence shifts, comes apart. Larger snakes are able to climb fairly up to 1 meter. That's something we have to consider. Hardware cloth is more likely to be a detriment for snakes than any other animal. It's because it's sharp. If it comes off its framework, an exclusion fence environment, then snakes can easily become entangled in this. So we have to really think about the mitigation for turtles and what we're doing with the snakes. Okay, so I'm going to go to my next screen here. So this shows some of the examples with snakes. They can find those small gaps and they can get through. They can find the small holes and they can get through, and sometimes they can't get back out. And that's a problem, because then they will perish in the fence. So some ideas, what we can do, we can securely make sure our joins, there are no gaps. We got to pay attention to that detail, especially for snakes. And then we can do really, really, really intense joins at elevation, vertical profile gains within the terrain to make sure that those gaps will not occur. This is an example of turtles in Long Point, where it's a priority, community nominated priority place for roads and other impacts to reptiles. And we find that we have a situation in the Long Point Causeway where we have beautiful, beautiful intact wetlands, large, massive wetlands. And then we have cottagers who like to live by wetlands as well. And of course, we have the roads. But in this circumstance, we have the turtles moving from this wetland right through here to nest and back again. So they have to do this every single year. So this is a huge problem for turtle mortality, including there are so many people here in the summer when they are nesting that there is a huge, or we haven't evaluated it, but we know there is a poaching threat. So turtles come up to nest, as I said before. And when they nest, some of their nests are predated, but they take a long time to nest on roads. They don't just come up, nest, take off. They're there crossing back and forth. I noticed this turtle on Front Road at Blandings at 7:30. I don't know how long it was there before I got there. At 9:30, it finally nested across the road 4 times. I had to watch it, make sure that the cars didn't hit it. And I also observed the reaction of the turtles to the passing cars while doing so. So this is the biggest problem here, is crossing back and forth nesting, and they don't move fast when they're doing this. This is an example in Long Point on Front Road where we're having a lot of turtles coming up. We believe up the steep terrain. Some could be coming from the inland wetlands. We believe some are climbing all the way up the steep terrain from Lake Erie marshland, and then their hatchlings have to somehow get back to where they're supposed to be. So this is a huge problem as well. We're having this is what it looks like, and we're going to be hopefully installing some mitigation there. What we do think will work well is having turtle guardian patrols helping these turtles cross in these areas. The traffic volumes are not significant, and that we would be able to do something like that. So just in summary, I like to compare. I've worked with large animals in Banff, that's where I started, and now I'm with reptiles, primarily in Ontario. And I like to compare lessons learned from large animals, because we've done so much more there for a longer period of time than we have done for reptiles. And I think we can take those lessons learned and we can apply them. And I will indicate that throughout this presentation. So with larger animals, exclusion fence is working quite better. You see statistics of up to 80% roadkill reductions. And this is because this fence is easier to build than the smaller animal fences. And I'll tell you why as we go through. But the smaller animal fences need to be, have no holes in them. So this is one of the main issues here. We can have mesh holes, but there is an apron at the bottom, and I'll talk about that later. Also, the spacing between structures has to be smaller, more structures for reptiles because they move more. So this means that we need an integrated strategy of designated plus drainage structures to be able to compensate for that spacing that we need. Larger animals are typically warm-blooded, so they can move faster, and they're not a threat with the changing environmental constraints that reptiles would be. They can't move far in very hot days, for example. Poaching and data concerns are a problem for our reptiles. And so because of poaching, we can't display where our reptiles are necessarily in a public forum. It makes it difficult for people to do research, for example, in some cases. And then of course, monitoring techniques for reptiles is more difficult because they're cold-blooded and we can't use the motion triggered cameras. This is us testing whether a motion camera that we use for large animals would work with reptiles, and it only picks it up on some occasions, not all occasions. So we have to make amendments for the modifications for that. So we went through monitoring actually in the last technical series, so you can look that up there if you would like. So there's two kinds of strategies, so to speak, with road ecology and road mitigation. And strategy type 1 is using citizen science behavior or changing motorist behavior. It's working with humans to try and help these animals. So one example is lifting them up with our hands, and when it's safe to do so, to help them cross the road, and to put up signage and hope that people will pay attention to that sign and perhaps look for turtles at that location, or perhaps when they're driving elsewhere. These signs work better with public awareness campaigns. And Liara has already shown you her sign. This is on Monk Road. And I think this is a good idea. And we need more of these, and bigger and in your face, the better. Okay, so we will now move to the main topic of this presentation, which is going to be talking about crossing structures and exclusion fence. We got a lot to cover, and we will take a break in about 15 minutes time after I talk about crossing structures. Exclusion fencing will cover a much larger component. It's more complicated. So we'll go through this topic in about 15 minutes. So the way we set it up is we have considerations, and we're going to go through, we tried to group the considerations into the same theme. So this first slide shows the first umbrella way of thinking about what you're doing when you're designing and implementing crossing structures for reptiles on roads to provide connectivity. You want to know, is it a retrofit? If it's a retrofit, that means that it's existing structure and you're trying to make that structure work for reptiles. Or is it a road improvement maintenance project? That's important, because if it is, you can earmark those, know about them, talk to the transportation agency, and have them perhaps upsize your culvert if it's a culvert replacement project, or also help to integrate the cost of including specific features in the crossing structure that you need in that replacement project. And one of them would be exclusion fencing, for example. You could get the cost integrated into that process. A new road, obviously, new road is a pretty good scenario, because you can implement designated structures as well as upsize your drainage structures for reptile crossing. And so the second consideration is to look at your target species, obviously. So for reptiles, we know our target species, so that's what we're talking about. We would want to look at whether the reptiles are aquatic or terrestrial, what type of passage. Snakes could be more terrestrial, but most of them, a lot of the reptiles will go through aquatic passages. We might want to integrate both aquatic and terrestrial passage in the structure. And so that shows at the bottom right here, where you would want to put a ramp going in for terrestrial passage. And perhaps you would promote or facilitate smaller mammal use in that scenario, and perhaps even some turtles would go through there. Then you want to look at habitat adjacent to the road, and essentially you want to look at whether or not you need these crossing structures for these animals. In some cases, you might not want them to cross the road, and I'm going to show an example of that. This is an example of a project I worked on in about 2015 with Morrison Hirschfield on Highway 17. It was being upgraded. The road was being widened, and we were wondering whether a crossing structure, there was a crossing structure here for hydrology, whether or not we wanted turtles to use that crossing structure, because you can see that it's a pristine habitat on one side, and it's a community which goes into more agricultural landscape on the other side. So in that case, we might close that crossing structure off. And we also know, we think they were nesting along this road. So they were coming here to nest, and that's why they were being road killed. So we would put nesting mounds here and actually close the crossing structure off. We don't necessarily want connectivity there, as long as we feel that they have their habitat on the north side of the highway. And this is an example of maybe you don't want connectivity, looking at it as site specific here, because you're putting the turtles or the animals right into a community where there's dogs and people. So that's not necessarily, so we have to think about that. That's important, the land use and what's happening around the situation. Considerations, the next consideration, third consideration, is the design of the structure, the size, whether you want open and or open bottom, open top, opportunities for openness, always looking for opportunities. So some clever ideas that have come up are using manholes or grates for the open top, and manholes which shine the light through, and open medians is another example. So this is an example of open top ACO tunnel, and this is an example of the footing in the Bruce Peninsula of a custom-made crossing structure where they put a grate on top. It's an example of open median. Now, if you're going to have an open median, it creates more openness, because now the structure is shorter, so there's more light coming in from both sides of the entrances and exit. And also you need to think about closing the median so that when they cross through, they won't go onto the road from there. And this is an example of Mexico where they actually have concrete closed medians. I don't think it was for wildlife, but it works well for wildlife. It's a very good example. Size is really, really important. We talk about size all the time. For larger animals, we know sizes and what works better because we've looked and monitored different types of structures next to each other. We still need to do that for turtles, but we don't necessarily have a perfect scenario to do so. One structure could have a lot of water in it, and the next structure next to it is smaller, nice to compare. It's a dry tunnel. So it's hard to have the exact same sampling effort at those structures. So these are the difficulties that we find and why we're not getting information as quick as we would like to be able to make charts like this. Generally speaking, we try and keep tunnels for reptiles, turtles, up to at least 1 meter and up. Studies have shown turtles like to use 1.8 meters, 1.2 meters have worked. And then we've seen studies with 3 meter by 2.8 meter reptile tunnels that work well as well. So the beaver activity, this is becoming more and more of an issue with road ecology and turtles simply because they share the same, beavers and turtles share the same habitat. So we have maintenance, putting grates up on the crossing structures because they don't want beavers damming inside that structure. So, and doing so, we have just, and I'm sure that fish biologists have been grappling with this problem for a long time. We have just closed off any connectivity permeability through that structure for turtles. So we're trying to come up with some solutions that will allow the beavers to keep their ponds, turtle habitat, and keep these grates open and not have beavers dam inside. And one way is by constructing trapezoidal fences around there, but actually creating a gap between the exclusion fence and the trapezoidal fence so that turtles following the fence come up and they can get through that gap, but beavers can't with their sticks. And beavers tend to not move upland. So you need to make room between the exclusion fencing and that trapezoidal fence to integrate that kind of concept. This is an example where they've gone in New York, where from Angie Ross sent these pictures where they've built the exclusion fencing, but now we don't have the connectivity. So we need to figure that out through these grates. This is an example of beavers damming the bottom of a culvert, but because the culvert is large for hydrology, the turtles can still get through, and we have pictures of turtles going through. So they've only dammed it a foot, so it's okay for wildlife passage. We can build diversionary dams and try and get beavers to dam elsewhere away from the culvert, and then we can integrate passage through that. So the consideration number 4 is the spacing of these structures. We need to consider having as many structures as possible. The more the better, up to 100 meters for toads. And from Europe, researchers saying 50 meters apart. For some salamanders in Europe, 50 meters apart. They don't move far. For turtles, we're looking at 100, 200 meters apart. To do this, we need to integrate drainage structures with designated structures. I've come to so many projects where I found the drainage structures could have been integrated into the whole strategy, and they weren't. And it's not the size that's the problem. I'll show some examples, but it's just the detail that we could use those structures. Either there's too much water in them, or there's too much riprap put around them, things like that. And we need to think about that. Now, everything can be a passage for turtles, even if it's too small. If it's not that 1 meter, we still don't know if a turtle's there, or if some maybe they don't want to use it, but if they have no choice, they will use it. So you got to think like that. Alignment in the road profile is so important, and I'll tell you why, and I'll show you some examples of that. So this is an example of not integrating drainage structures in a road that had spent a lot of money. This is Stony Swamp in Ottawa, spent a lot of money on designated box crossing structures, which I'll show you a picture of. And then right next door, there'd be this drainage, but there's a grate on it. And the grate would have a bunch of debris in front of it. Nothing can get through. So, I mean, there is opportunity for passage here. So I cleared all that debris. But people want to think about that, and we need to. That's the other side of that. So the turtles can get in, get all the way in, and then they're going to be blocked here. So that's not very good to have them go all the way through and then have to turn around and go all the way back. This is an example of a drainage structure that we need for turtles, and it was filled with riprap at the entrance. As a simple detail, an oversight, and so they came back and they put in smaller gravel between the riprap so that the turtles could and other animals could more easily walk. I've seen riprap used in designated structures where they were put in wetlands, and I've seen it all over the world. So this happens everywhere, and it's a simple thing because we're used to just putting riprap at our drainage structures, and so we have to just think outside of the box. Hydrology is so important. I've heard people say that within agencies say that if they're fully submerged, turtles won't use them. That's not true. We've had monitored this culvert when it's almost full to the top, and we have turtles going through there. It is nice to have perhaps 75 to 50% water flow or water submergence, because then there's more light, and also they can come up for air if they need it. And so they're definitely, but it doesn't mean that they won't use them if they are full, but we do want to maybe look at 50 to 75% water flow. And we don't want massive water flow either going through, because that could force them to go in and they can't turn around and get out and things like that. So we can impede water flow simply by putting blocks in front of the structure, inside the structure, things like that. We also want to consider when an animal's moving along for hundreds of meters along a fence, looking for a way through, to maybe stop them, slow them down when they finally get there so that they will use it. And that's what these outward extensions are exactly for. And it's quite important to think about that, not necessarily to block the entrance, maybe pull it out a little bit, but I've read in so many papers where the frogs have just walked right by. Perched culverts, you see it all the time, and not just for hydrology, but you see it for designated crossing structures. There's scouring when the water comes through. This is an example of our field day on the right. And we built a turtle ladder or snake ladder or hopefully wildlife ladder for the animals to climb up that perch culvert. And that's how simple it can be. Just grab a pile of rocks and build that ladder. Here is a perch culvert. They had put fill hard mud inside the culvert, so we took it out at the front here and we used it to build up a ramp so they could get in, because it was about, I don't know, 6 inches off a ledge for the animals to climb in. Maintenance and monitoring and adaptive management, we went through that in the last workshop, but we have to definitely consider this when we're building these structures, and definitely monitoring so we can do adaptive management. These are examples from Noble Road. We have a crossing structure with mass amount of vegetation, Highway 69. This is a crossing structure for reptiles. We cleared that with a weed whipper and we made a path for turtles. It's important to do each season. And with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're about perfectly on time because we started late. And what I'm going to say here is that people can chat, but if you have anything to add to anything about crossing structures, these are just things to get you starting to think. We would ask that you put them in the chat box at this time. Q&A is going to be for the end when we have time for Q&A. And I think if Leora has anything to say there, I'm going to take a small break for 5 minutes, and then I'll be back. Thank you for listening so far.
Thanks, Carrie. So again, the question for any of the practitioners and biologists that have had experience with, and anyone else who might have some unique ideas, how do we make them more inviting, these drainage culverts? And how can we open structures? And again, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer box as opposed to the chat box. So solar powered heating lighting, that's a really interesting answer, actually, the solar lighting. I think Carrie can speak to that. There has been underpasses where artificial lighting has helped. Is that so, Carrie?
Yes, amphibians, they've tried lighting. I don't know how rigorous the studies are. That's whether to say the crossing structure with light was used more than the crossing structure without light. I think they just shone light and then they use them. So
Well,
we
yeah.
need some more rigorous studies for sure to look at that.
But potentially Kim, who put that suggestion forward, I think that's potentially would help. I mean, turtles do appreciate openness and feel more comfortable with that openness, and the sense of openness is based on light.
Yeah.
So it is something we may even try at Turtle Guardians, a lit structure and a not lit structure. If we can find comparable controls.
And Leora, at the bottom left in that slide is, I forgot to mention, Zani research in the States, I think Michigan, but there's reflective
right. And that's even more passive and less maintenance issues or less concern in terms of just having a mirrored like structure. That's true.
Scent baiting maybe.
Okay, other ideas are open top.
Yes,
yep.
Somebody just talked about the reflective flashing.
And then the clutter within the underpass so that there is cover for snakes if they need snakes, if they need some cover. That's an interesting idea. Carrie, do you have any comment on that?
Yes, definitely. And some of the salamanders can go under the cover too, so that they don't get eaten by the snake. But yeah, cover is recommended inside as much as you can.
Okay. And then other comments, Rava, again, with the reflective materials. So very, very good ideas. So less metal. So one person, Angela Vanderaken, hi Ange, has talked about less metal is more appealing potentially. So plastic or concrete is more appealing. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I think it would be something to look into for sure. I can't say offhand whether or not
Angela, if you have a reference for that research paper that you're talking about, if you could share it either through email or immediately through the chat, we will put it out to everyone as well and include it in our portfolio.
Perfect.
And then Jordan Thacker has talked about noise blocking. Is there a way to help with noise blocking?
That would be good. Buffer. Get some engineers involved in that.
Yeah, because noise blocking, maybe the debris or the woody debris and cover might help with noise blocking, but the noise from above, if anyone's lived above in an apartment with someone above you, it's really quite loud, and it is amplified in that arch shape with the, especially with metal. It bounces off that arch shape quite loud.
So Leora, I'm just going to excuse myself for a couple of minutes. I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, absolutely. LED was another option, and yeah, LED because it's in the blue spectrum and it mimics daylight. So LED lights are actually blue and not white, and all life, including ourselves, because we are animals as well, assume that means that it's dusk, dawn, or daylight. We only see blue in the sky during the day. Blue is a very is not a normal color in nature. It's not everywhere. So LED light being especially those long tubes, would be an easy solution to encourage wildlife to feel comfortable. And Rava, if your study on reflective flashings is available too, please share any studies or links with us, either in the survey that you'll get later or in the chat box. So scent baiting is interesting. So Sarah has put scent baiting. Now, there's definite evidence that turtles follow scent trails and have really good noses for pheromones. So that is an interesting idea for sure. And I think snakes as well. So that's a really interesting idea. So Sarah, we're going to look into that, and I wish Carrie was here to comment. I don't know any studies that have used scent baiting. So loose leaf debris was another comment. And again, for everyone on this call, if you haven't entered or done the poll is still live. If you click on the poll, you can answer questions about your past experience and what sector you're representing, including if you're a volunteer. And again, I want to encourage everyone after this webinar to fill in the questionnaire so we get a good idea of your concerns, of your experience, that we can share with everyone, and we can share the results. So Carrie will be talking about cost for each of these different structures. So if Tom could put that question in the Q&A, that would be really great. Of course, concrete is the most expensive, but the most durable and the least and the most inert. And it would be great if municipalities and governments would look at concrete rather than plastic and others. Plastics leach endocrine disruptors in water. So there's issues with plastics, but Carrie will talk to that. If you can put it in the Q&A, Tom, that would be great. And food, a practical food to bait turtles. If that's what you're talking about, that's also interesting. So it depends on an aquatic or terrestrial culvert in terms of food. Not all turtles can eat on land, but that's a fun idea. So Carrie, you missed the scent baiting of turtles. I thought that was kind of fun and interesting. So pheromones to attract turtles to go through the culverts.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to remind everyone, any questions rather than comments. So the brainstorming is for the chat, and the questions, if you would please put in the Q&A, and you can vote up the questions, and we'll get to the questions after Carrie's presentation, so we can talk about cost benefit, different materials and their prices and their maintenance issues. So the questions related to debris versus and cost, those can all go in the questions and answers. And even and there was a good idea about textured concrete. I think that's actually could be a really good sound buffer. Concrete is a great sound buffer. Okay, baffles, similar idea of different textures. Baffles are a really interesting idea. Okay, there we go. All right, take it away, Carrie.
All right. I answered a couple of the questions.
Also, before Carrie begins, the chat is also recorded, so we will summarize everyone's suggestions. And you can also, if you haven't made suggestions now and you've learned from this workshop and have a unique idea, you can put it in the survey that's coming in the email.
Or story, pictures.
Yeah. When I work with the road engineers, it's amazing the creative solutions that they come up with. So as you learn more about turtle biology and infrastructure, and you have some of those creative ideas, don't be afraid to try to suggest some of them. There's lots of engineers on this call, and so amazing creativity. Okay, Carrie.
Right. Okay, so you can still see my screen, right? You can see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go into exclusion fence and /wall. Walls are important to consider, definitely. This is about barriers. This is about keeping turtles off the road. and so that we prevent roadkill and funneling them to crossing structures. Hopefully going to spend 25 minutes on this section. It's a doozy, that's for sure. So we've already gone over these types of considerations from an exclusion fence perspective. If it's a retrofit, we need to go out and select our site that will be conducive to installing exclusion fence and there has to be the crossing structures, or maybe we want to just put exclusion fencing in on one side of the road because there is trouble on the other side of the road that we don't want them to get at. That's possible as well. Road improvement maintenance projects, they are helpful, as I said, because they can integrate some of the cost, hopefully into the project, but also it can help to structure the road widening project or the culvert replacement project. You have the machines out there, and so they could help prepare the landscape for the installation. New roads, obviously, you are given the opportunity to work with the landscape a little bit more, the linear route, to perhaps install guide rails that you can attach the fence to, or use the any existing structures, or build in those existing structures. And possibly there could be a large animal fence going up. So obviously, excellent opportunity to integrate mitigation for smaller animals, and I'll talk about that. So considerations number 2 is looking at the placement more of the exclusion fence. So whether or not the structure, the wall can be continuous along the road transportation route. And the main reasons why this does not happen is because we lose connectivity from access roads and from driveways. So we have to take that into account. If there's a lot of driveways, you may not even want to consider exclusion fencing. However, there is some solutions for that, and I will look at them. And for large animals, we use Texas gates. And so there's that kind of concept as well for reptiles. The placement along the road slope is very, very important. This is an example on Highway 401. We have slumping happening, and I've read this in papers all over the world where the fence has fallen or slumped and failed in specific spots where it is too steep to hold. The substrate can't hold it. Additional structures we need to look at to attach the reptile fence, much more stable if it's attached to a structure that's already existing, and the substrate, whether or not we're installing, we need proper substrate to put our posts in, to bury the fence. Can we bury the fence? Is there riprap there? Then that we need to know that there's riprap there. Quite often there's topsoil poured on top of riprap, and we don't know that. So what kind of posts can we use for our exclusion fence? General rule of thumb is to have the fence, exclusion fence, span the entire wetland habitat. I'm thinking for turtles, and then go beyond that. So we've installed in the beginning days in 2012-13 exclusion fence. We didn't have time or budget to put it through the wetland, and we just created a fence end issue where we had maybe even more turtles road killed than we did the year before with no fence. So we extended the fence, we improved the problem. So if you don't have the budget to do it, extend it all the way across, then half won't work, half as well. Half will work probably worse than what it was before. So we have to definitely consider all of the habitat. This is the solution. This is from Europe. This is something we can do. It's a Texas gate example at the access road. This is on Highway 6 in the Bruce on the left. If we put in a tunnel underneath there, attaching to the exclusion fencing on both sides, and then the exclusion fencing can go up the access road a little bit, or here you can see on the right that it extended a little bit out, but I would have put that a little bit more away from the road to keep the animals moving straight through, and it's all continuous and it's open grade, so they probably feel comfortable going in there and they don't go up and over and onto the road. So these are things that I believe this kind of concept was installed on Highway 6, but I haven't been out there to see it in the Bruce. If anybody has pictures or seen that, please send them.
Carrie, would you give us the name of that fence again and the material?
This is an example from Europe. It's from it's an ACO, ACO barrier wall. And what we used on Highway 6, there were supposed to be ACO tunnels that went on along the access road, open top, and then they were going to join onto the exclusion fencing that was being designed there. So
and
that's
just quickly,
Highway 6 in the Bruce.
Right. And quickly, maybe for those who are new to turtle conservation and turtle behavior, can you just talk really quickly about how turtles navigate and how much they can climb and why they actually need to cross the road?
We're going to go into that a little bit more.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
That's good to know. That's great to know,
Yeah.
Carrie. You
We
don't
should
have to do
cover
that
all
now. So just for everyone attending, those are the facts. If you're not familiar with turtle biology and behavior, there are reasons the turtles have to cross the road. Turtles are exceptionally good climbers. They navigate the landscape uniquely, and Carrie will touch on those. And so designing these with a biologist at your side is really important who understands these things. Thanks, Carrie.
Let me know if I don't cover them. Okay, so here, this is a consideration for the exclusion fence. I talked about attaching it to larger animal fence. This is an example in the top left where there was not any reptile fence attached. And had they put reptile fence, it could have done a dual purpose in that it could act as the apron that you often see with large animal fence now. An apron is a buried piece, chain link. I'll show you a picture of that later. It's to keep animals from going under. As you can see, animals go under. And then you have different examples, bottom left, of this is something from Germany with Hans, where they have a concrete footing panel and there's drainage holes, and that would work for reptiles if it was just a little higher. Rule of thumb is typically 60 centimeters above for them, and then a top lip is even additional security that they won't climb because they have been seen climbing exclusion fencing. Farm fences are excellent examples to attach reptile fencing to, and maybe you have to build it, but sometimes it could be there. In Mexico, this is an example of on the right of way of every single highway in Mexico, there is this farm type fence, concrete posts, which are embedded in the ground and probably have been there for a long time. I'm trying to get them to use these structures for exclusion fencing and not build a whole new structure. The terrain is very important to look at when you choose your exclusion fence. This is from Barbeasley in BC. In the rainforest, you probably would not choose concrete. It's not accessible. It's very rocky, very hilly. She went with like a pool shade cloth. This is also something they used in Long Point because of the conditions there, and very wet and things like that. So although it might not last as long, it is away from, they don't have snow, but well, they do now. Anyway, get my point. Bottom right, there you're looking at wetlands. So are you able to bury that in those wetlands? So what are you going to do to get that into that wetland and to be secure? Those are things to consider. It can get quite expensive, and that's also Canadian Shield rock. And so that's what I'm going to say there. The terrain, considerations number 3 is the terrain that you're looking at. I talked about that already. If you have steep slopes, you have to consider that. Where are you going to place it along that slope? Safety constraints, it's different for every jurisdiction almost, but they continually talk about the clear zone. The MTO especially talks about the clear zone. You can't have metal objects in the clear zone, so that counts out T-posts. You need to know about that because then you're not going to use T-posts in your exclusion fence. So you need to know about that in the designing phase for your exclusion fence design. Drainage constraints, is obviously a big issue on roads. We've been trying to work with draining with more storm events on roads that have been occurring. So there are going to be washouts, and that's always going to happen, regardless if you use mesh or solid. Might happen more with one of the other, we're not exactly sure, but it happens with mesh. This is mesh right here. A simple fix is to put riprap in the areas where you think that those washouts are going to happen, where the terrain dips down and things like that when you're implementing your fence. So another, because often we're not so much in Ontario, but there's barrier walls are a consideration for exclusion. And then in that case, you would could put pipes underneath, which might not be as an expensive option as installing like sewer systems or something like that. But this is an example of pipes going underneath, and this is a drainage pipe. And you could put mesh on there so animals don't get through, and close that off for that kind of issue. And here's an example of a solid barrier being transformed into a solid drainage, having drainage capacity with Animex, or hoping to get this into the mainstream market with their perforated panels, where it will be buried into the ground. So exclusion fence considerations 4 are the target species. Obviously, Lior brought up. We might be blocking turtles' habitat needs with this exclusion fencing. That's why the crossing structures are important. But at the same time, they could have been nesting on that side of the road where you just put the exclusion fencing. So maybe you want to position your exclusion fencing so they still have access to the nesting habitat on the roadside. And if they don't, then you might want to supplement that with a nesting turtle beach. We won't go into that too much, but it is important, and we need more design there and innovation, because we are having problems with poaching. Again, another complication with turtles. If there's going to be poaching and poachers know that the turtles are there along the roadside, they may go up and down the exclusion fence looking for these turtles. So how do we make that work? And so opportunities to put these nesting beaches a little further away from the road would make sense. And we need southwest exposure, so we need to know that there's not going to be forest and trees around that nesting mound. So that's definitely something to consider. That's a whole nother workshop, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Turtles can climb, so we need to ensure that we don't know how many turtles. Is it just 1 or 2, 3 individuals that are very tenacious? We can hopefully stop them from climbing by providing them crossing structures. So we need to figure that out, how many of these turtles are actually going to climb our exclusion fencing. And we'll talk about some of the exclusion fencing we're using and whether they climb it or not. This is 3/8 inch mesh, just a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch. So I'm not sure if we have any observations of turtles climbing this particular mesh. So that's something to consider. And this is examples of the nesting beaches. So this is where we know that the turtles are nesting. We've put exclusion fencing in, we've cut them off to their nesting habitat. This is an example in the Bruce where they put a nesting beach. This is Presqu'île, where they built their nesting beach almost exactly like the road shoulder, and it's compact, and they've shown pretty good success. But they have to protect those nests because they have high raccoon levels, because there's a lot of people and camping and things like that here. So it has to be a integrated strategy, not just put the nesting in and then leave. And this is an example of a brick sand nesting mound inside the exclusion fence in Simcoe County. Budget is obviously going to be a big one. We'll talk about cost, who's paying and how you're going to get the money. We're going to talk about a few specific examples. Longevity, the desired lifespan, best to go permanent in the beginning. Then you don't have to do it again and go through the whole process again. Do it right, make them permanent and long lasting. Monitoring and adaptive management, obviously, we talked about that before. Maintenance, who's responsible? This is a problem all over the world, not just here, about who will perform the maintenance. And it's more important because one small hole, the turtles will find. It's amazing that they are so tenacious, and maybe it's because they just really don't want to use those crossing structures. So we got to make those crossing structures work for them, and we've got to make sure that we don't provide them opportunities to evade our systems that we're building, spending lots of money for building for them. Exclusion fence considerations, not just the fence itself. A fence end is so important. If you have good fence ends, and if you can't span as much habitat as you want and go 100 meters beyond and 100 meters beyond, if you have a good fence end and find those opportunities, then you can really save that fence end effect from happening, which is a huge problem. It's a problem with large animals, problem with reptiles. Jump outs. Jump outs are something that we've, with large animals, we've redesigned, and we keep being innovative with them, the heights and different details. And I'm going to go through that with reptiles. Fence ends, we can either do nothing, which is shown on the right, not recommended. We can, if you're going to do nothing, at least make sure you span all of the habitat and then some. Tie into existing or engineered structure, find those structures. At the other end of this fence, there's actually a bridge going across, and they ended it right before. And if they extended it to that bridge, it would have been better. Curved end, not just a little curved end. I'll show you examples. Move the fence away from the road. So this is an example of a tie-in and into an engineered structure, wing wall, and it wasn't done properly. So what you can do to fix that, great, temporary fix, might even last quite a long time, is just put some rocks in there and you got drainage, and turtles can't get through that. A lot of times on Highway 69 with these rocky outcrops, you would see the exclusion fence ending on the top, but a big no-no is the turtle follows, or the animal follows right to the end of the cliff, and then they might jump. You don't know that. Well, we found that turtles did jump this cliff. It's 5 feet, 5 meters. And we found 3 or 4 roadkill turtles here. So a better way is to perhaps tie it into the cliff. You got to assess each one, not halfway up. That won't work either. We found that turtles went straight down and in anyway. To extend it away, and then I'll show you some other examples of what you can do with the fence end, curving it and moving it away from the road. This is one, moving it away into the forest. This was, it took a lot of work to go into that forest and to remove the debris, and we're probably going to have a lot of trees fall on it as well, but that's what we chose to do, and it's protected in there from snow at least, and it went in about 50 meters and snaked through there. So that's one of the Cadillac fence ends and I've been involved with. Here's another one on Highway 7 with Animix. We tied it into a rocky outcrop here. And I mean, they could still climb and go around and jump here if they so chose, but because we curved it around in a way, we're hoping that we loop them back. This is an example of a don't. So this is the MTO in their standard drawings right now. It needs to be updated. This is what happens on almost, I don't know, 80% of the MTO reptile fence projects. We have a little 1 meter loop back and maybe 2 meters coming back in. Paul Haven's research has shown that a 6 meter out and in has diverted at least 25% of turtles back. And they didn't go back around because he had a camera. So he looked at that. This is in Vermont. This is a small loop back, not a J hook. I saw in the chat that not ideal. We want this. That's what we want. And that's what the research has shown to date. Jump outs. When are they needed? I've seen some jump outs every couple 100 meters along long exclusion fence projects. And I'm like, why are there so many jump outs? We don't need that many jump outs. If you have a good, strong, solid mitigation strategy with fencing and crossing structures, and you shouldn't need jump outs. Jump outs are intended for when you think an animal is going to get on a road and be trapped by the exclusion fence or wall. So keeping that in mind, when would that happen? That would happen when you only have exclusion fence on one side. That would happen when you only have a fence end that ends here and fence on the other side. So you probably want to jump out here. This is an example of Big Creek Bridge in the Long Point, and we're putting 4 jump outs here because we're having crossing here, but we can't. These are access roads here, and so either we put those tunnels in, as I showed you in a Texas gate type things here, or we have animals coming in. Hopefully most of them will use this brand new bridge with a terrestrial bench in there to cross. But if they don't, then we have well built and designed jump outs here. And the jump outs here are going to be so important to be designed properly. And I'm going to show you that. Thanks to Dave Seaburn, who sent these pictures in of a really neat design. I'd been there myself and I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but this culvert is a jump out. However, either there's maintenance or if there's going to be no maintenance, this jump out won't work because the dirt has come down, and that means now animals on the roadside can climb up here and go and circumvent the exclusion fence, which we don't want them to. This one is intact, and the turtle used it the right way. And that's probably the only picture I have ever seen of a turtle using a jump out. They're hard to monitor. This is examples of jump outs I've seen along many provincial projects, but also I'm starting to see them a lot in municipal projects, and I don't like them at all. They're terrible and they're not installed properly. They're faulty. If this 2x4 gets kicked out, they become dislodged. Now you got a hole in the fence. You got to cut a hole in the fence to put them in, which means that there could be so much opportunity for gaps to occur. So we're starting to close them all off. And plus there's way too many of them. So you have a strategy that doesn't work just because of the jump outs. So here we have jump out. At least this is temporary. It's probably going to be eroded, but there's no cutting into the exclusion fence and messing with it. And we actually have a picture of a snake using a jump out. So that's good. Garter snake. So the concepts from large animals is probably the best to use in for reptiles. And that is we need a ramp for them to access and jump over. And we need a barricade on the roadside. And this height is always so important. This is on the safe side, the habitat side. This is for large animals. We've been playing around the height because we don't want deer to jump up. Some deer, mule deer are better jumpers than white-tailed deer. And what will they jump? What will bears be able to get past? So this is all considerations we've gone through. So for reptiles, 60 centimeters is good with an overhang lip. I'll show you an example of that being installed. If it's for fox snakes, you need 1 meter here. You can have what you have for turtles. If you have a jump out that's only 60 centimeters, the rest of your exclusion fencing is 1 meter for that target species. It's useless because you need everything to be at the proper specifications for the target species. Here they put a bar up to try and deter animals from jumping that way, the wrong way, and they have a deflector so that when the animal comes along, it deflects them to the jump out, which is awesome. So this is a concept that we need to look at in Ontario, and lo and behold, the project in Ottawa, Stony Swamp, has done exactly this. So we have a great jump out, very low maintenance concrete block with a lip. So the turtles come along, they can't get over. And they have the ramp here for them that goes 180 degrees. So it can go up there and it can go up here and over. And they will. And this is an example where the fence didn't extend to the crossing structure. So good spot to put a jump out so that they come out here and they will go there and then they're on the safe side. So there's a little bit of thought that went into that. And this is an example of a large animal one in Kootenay, where you can actually excavate to get your height as well. If you didn't get your height with the here, then you can excavate to get more height on this side. This is an example from Angie Ross in DC in New York, and this is using one of the fence panels. And I don't necessarily like this because small mammals can get up over there, but it could work for turtles. So it's an example of, but again, this height is so important so that they can't get up and over. Larger snapping turtles may be able to do that. Okay, I think I'm going to take a small break. No, actually, I'm going to go through this if everybody seems to be okay. How are you doing, Leora?
I'm good. I think we can barrel through. Yep.
Okay.
We've
May
got
as well
lots of
still on
questions.
topic with the exclusion fence.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions to answer, and
Okay. After this, there's a break.
If people haven't looked at the chat, great conversation in the chat. And yes, I totally gapped in terms of baiting turtles with food, and never a good idea because you'll also bait predators of turtles. And also changing, yeah, food is never a good idea, and feeding wildlife is not a great idea generally anyway. So yeah, go for it, Carrie.
Okay, I'll go for it. Exclusion fence and wall components. So we're going to go through variations between, I talked about walls and I talked about exclusion fence, and more about the pieces of them and the installation and the costs, with the mind frame of choosing what works best for your project. Okay, so framework, because it's hard to, when I write these guideline documents, people want me to say, okay, just tell us what to do. Yeah, I can't for every project, for every species. And it has to be site specific. We need to involve engineers. We need to involve road ecologists. We need to involve landscape architects, landscapers, and fence contractors as well. So there's a lot going into this, and there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it as well. So framework. For exclusion fence, we're thinking not wall, just an exclusion fence at this point. We need posts, pressure treated. We've seen pressure treated being used on the MTO projects, and they can't use the metal T-posts, so they go there. You could use T-posts if you're allowed to in your other projects, if you have road allowance and things like that. Cedar posts used for large animal fence quite often. Consider outriggers or chain link or wood piece coming out. You can see this bottom picture, that's top piece of wood is also acting as possibly as a lip, if it works. Hopefully the turtles, it deters them from getting over. And then a buried bottom is something you need to consider. We talked about that. If it's Canadian shield rock, maybe you need to put it at a right angle and then bury on top of that. You might need to put in some kind of pegs to hold it down into the rock. So that means you might need to drill some holes. Attachment to the other structure, we talked about that. So the fabric is important. Fabric is a big one, and that's what pretty much goes into your framework or along your framework at your specified height for your target animal. There could be plastic, and there's plastics out there that's solid versus mesh. There's concrete, there's aluminum. There's aluminum we haven't seen so much, but I'm going to talk about that. There is hardwire cloth, which I do not recommend for reptiles at all because of entanglement. And then there's chain link, which is steel, which is often selected because it's accessible, and we know, and contractors know how to install it. The problem is with chain link, here's some chain link here, is snakes can obviously get through, and so can hatchlings. Now, Leora mentioned in the beginning that maybe we're looking just at adult turtles, and that's what we're doing. So if that's your selection and your choice, then chain link would work. It's easy to put the outriggers on top of chain link, and this is shown to work well for adult turtles on Highway 24 attached to a 1.8 meter drainage culvert. And this is the MTO design we're seeing all over Eastern Ontario. And the purpose of this top piece of wood is to provide that lip to go over. I would maybe extend it a little bit more and attach a little more, because the lip at the angle isn't, I don't think it's sufficient. But again, do we know that turtles are climbing this? It's pretty tall. This fence is up at least a meter. So and it's small mesh. This is chain link mini mesh, they call it. And it's being used here. We have seen some smaller snakes go through there. That's a con. But again, if we're looking at adult turtles, how many snakes are we losing that are going in there? So it would be good to evaluate that. This is the 1/4 inch hardware cloth made in China. It's very heavy gauge. I don't necessarily like it because if it becomes disentangled from the framework, it's now a very sharp object. We think that this doesn't rust easily, as opposed to what we saw on Noble Road. And I think in Noble Road, they had used a 1/4 inch accessible made in Canada fabric from Home Depot or somewhere like that. And that rusts out. We know that rusts out in water. We don't use that anymore. But this, we haven't seen it rust out yet, 8 years of being implemented. So these are the things that we're still looking at as they get implemented. And I talked about building the farm fence and attaching it, this in Mexico. And I'm not sure what, this is an example of it being attached to a guide rail. That just helps tremendously with the you have so much more selection of what you can put up when you have that, because you have your framework is there. And it also cuts down on your costs for the installation. It's simply attaching to something that's already there. The posts are hard and they're expensive part. This example of chain link on Highway 401, you can see the support cross wires on there and the outrigger for the lip. Posts. I talked about 4x4 inch pressure treated posts can be used. These are 8 feet. This is an example on the Highway 401 project that I showed you earlier. Concrete posts, this example from Mexico. And then these are cedar posts, I think. This is in Kootenai. And this is an example of the chain link apron going in. Now you could use any kind of apron. If you're looking at reptiles here in Ontario, you would replace perhaps the chain link with something else. It could be solid plastic, could be whatever you choose for your apron that works for reptiles in that spot. Exclusion fence fabric, not recommended, wood. It warps and it's very difficult to fit into the terrain. There's an example of screen cloth that was blown out on several projects in Ontario. It obviously won't last the elements. And I talked about hardware cloth, geotextile. Freestanding geotextile would be a problem. There's so many different kinds of geotextile, pool cloths and things like that. That could work in British Columbia when you don't have a lot of snow and it's tucked away in the forest there. It could last quite a while if it's built properly. So solid plastic is examples Animex, and for the freestanding, they're recommending cross wires to help with keeping it up. Obviously, you can attach it to a farm fence or build a farm fence, or you can attach it to a large animal fence. And a con has been the drainage problem. So now they've come up with the perforations, and you can get it with the top lip. You can put it top lip if you would like. Tricky to, what was one of the cons there? Tricky to fit to changing horizontal and vertical terrain. You need to look at that. Install in warm temperatures is better because it's plastic. So we know how plastic works in really, really cold temperatures. It's very difficult to maneuver. The cost, including the posts, are $35 to $40 per meter, and it's manufactured in the States, so it can get here quite quick. Here's the MTL fence I talked about. I'm not going to go too much into that. I already described it in detail. I'm just going to show you some of the costs here. Caveats, evidence some snakes. Can turtles climb? We don't know. Requires cross bracing in routine areas. And these are the specs for it. And it costs $38 per meter as per the supplier several years ago. That's supplying it in Ontario, and the materials with everything together, including the posts, were $60 to $70 per meter for that type of exclusion fence. These are the ones that have been installed in Ontario that I'm going through right now. And this is an example I call it the Waterton design because it was first used in Alberta with metal, corrugated steel pipe cut in half and put in the ground. And then in Ontario, we've seen it with the HDPE pipe in several locations. This is an example in Halliburton, and the specs are there, 75 centimeters high. So it's cut in half. And I just wanted to show the cost of this type of fence is about $43 per meter. And that came straight from Heaven's paper that he wrote up on it. And one thing that we would do in the future, as per Paul, is to make these posts a little bit stronger. Slumping is can be the issue there, and maybe less riprap on the backside. That's just my observation, because that's pretty heavy stuff. You want to avoid slumping of your fence. And I talked about that before when you put it on slopes and things like that. So the ERTEC was installed in, this is a plastic mesh, was installed on Roseville Road in near Guelph, Waterloo. And these are the specs for it. Pros: allows drainage. It's ideal for uneven terrain, as we saw in Barb Beasley's example. And in some places in Long Point, it would work well when you need to install in the water. Some of the cons is if it's too close to the road, it will suffer road damage, snow damage, sorry, from snow clearing, and could be subject to vegetation entanglement because there's mesh. So you would need to clear the vegetation. But then, of course, you need to be careful with weed whackers when you go in with this type of material. So those are the things all the things to consider. I've used this fence for when I've had beavers flood the wetland and the existing fence becomes submerged. I put a piece on top. It's very easy to attach to things. So I like it, and I like it for washouts. Put it on the bottom here, and it's not close to the road, works well. So it's all about the application of the material to fit what you need to do. And knowing what's available out there. So I wanted to compare all of these costs to large animal costs, large animal fencing, because in a lot of cases in Ontario, we need both. We need large animal and reptiles. So with just a little extra money, we can build both for US, and I should have converted that Canadian. So let's say it's about $100 to $110 Canadian per meter for the large animal fence here that I'm showing you. And Terry McGuire sent this from Kootenay, from a Kootenay example in out west. And this is with 1 meter chain link for an apron. Wood, steel, or T-post would vary the price a bit. And it's page wire deer fence that gets installed. You can see at the bottom here, you can see the chain link at the bottom. And you could, as I said, you could change that apron to the material that you wanted for your target species. So that's, so for 100 US, 130 Canadian per meter, we could have both types of fence. That's, sorry, I want to make sure you know that's materials and installation. Whereas before we were just looking at materials. So this gives you a ballpark idea that of how much these things should cost. And we can go from there. Now, in addition to costs of materials and installation, there are other costs to think about right now, especially with everything that's going on in the world. Design oversight, you need to add 10% per kilometer. And that's something to consider. Maybe that number varies a bit. Delivery, delivering heavy material is going to be something to think about for sure. And I'll go into that a little bit more. Installation will vary, and obviously in the cost, but we're seeing high numbers for installation. I'm going to talk about that closer to the end. And a lot of it is due to COVID, supply chain and staffing shortages right now, but there may be ways that we can keep that number to a range that is practical. And could be contractor markups, and monitoring and maintenance, of course, needs to be integrated into the overall cost of installing this stuff, which hasn't been a lot on a lot of projects, hasn't been integrated. Exclusion wall components, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. It's not as complicated as exclusion fence. It simply because it works better and it's just more expensive, but it works better. And we should definitely be thinking of just going this route instead of fidgeting around with all the other exclusion fences that sometimes have their pros and cons. And whereas these just have pros, except for the fact that they cost more. So we have sheet piling, concrete blocks, armor stone, prefabricated concrete panels. The thing is with these is the maintenance costs are so much lower that you're really just looking at, if it's installed properly, you're really just looking at clearing vegetation. So this example from Vermont, we've written this up in a couple case studies. It's available on the web if anybody wants to know more about this project, where they used concrete waste blocks. So the expense for the material was negligible, but the cost was in delivery. And the contractor that installed the crossing structures also installed the fence. So it was kind of all included. Anyway, so it ended up costing, for the price I got was $96 per meter, but that includes installation and the delivery. So that's US. And this is, did I show a picture of what it looks like? No, not there, but from kind of an aerial perspective. So we've seen this in Ontario, right here in Whitby, Victoria Avenue. We have a very expensive wall along a wetland. So that's good. Maybe this one's overkill for turtle, but this could have been for pedestrians as well. But for turtles, we obviously just need this kind of height, 2 feet. And this is Jackson Lake in Florida, the famous study from Orozco. And the prices, he wasn't exactly sure because it was all integrated in one big price, but he's estimating approximately $500 per meter, estimated. No maintenance cost, effective. He hasn't gone back. It was installed a while ago. He doesn't worry, everything works there. So that's the bonus there. This is an example from 2008 in Europe, in Switzerland, where they integrated drainage into the wall. So the drainage goes to the culverts, which is kind of cool. If you do a Google image of this site, it's actually still there because it's concrete and it's not going anywhere too fast. Installation considerations. The season that you're going to install all of this is very important. You can get posts into frozen ground. So give yourself time and just understand that it's going to take maybe 2 or 3 years, especially now with COVID. A trench is so important. How are you going to get that trench? Some places are much more difficult than other places. Access to the site, traffic control, and oversight is huge. So huge that we make sure that what is put on the drawings and the design is integrated into what's actually on the ground. And we need our transportation agencies and our engineers and environmental planners to get in there and ensure that that happens. Okay, so this is good. I've made up some time. So we can have a good break here for 10 minutes and we will talk about these kind of things. So Leora, I'll let you read them because I need the break.
Okay, and these are the questions you'd like everyone to ponder?
Yeah, the brainstorming questions.
So the brainstorming question is what goes where depends on a site-specific assessment criteria application, etc. Can you consider other fence types and barrier wall types? So this is just an open end. What other materials can we use? And I've looked at the poll right now. We've got 30% of the audience has no experience with turtles or turtle mitigation whatsoever. And so again, Carrie will cover, and if Carrie doesn't, I will cover why it's important that the turtle crosses the road, how turtles behave and how they navigate. It's really easy to underestimate a turtle and underestimate their needs. So for now, for all of you, if you can think of other fence materials, I can tell you the Land Between and Turtle Guardians, we've used steel food grade barrels from a soy plant, from a soy factory. So they're inert. And so the arch shape is extremely durable. It handles snow load. The good thing about the steel barrels is backfilling them, even with gravel, is okay as long because you can weld a foot to those barrels. So the lateral stability is inherent. The only issue is, of course, rusting. And we are using those steel barrels, those half pipe kind of barrels, as jump out exclusion fencing. So they're exclusion fencing and you can exclude the whole site, or you can use them as jump out sections.
I have a slide on that, Leora.
Okay, great.
Up.
So that was my idea on a different kind of fence that is cheap and fairly easy to maintain because they come in 1 meter sections that we can hand dig in. So that's kind of fun. But any other ideas? I've talked to some engineers and they're thinking about wood. And wood forms and making wood barriers. So open up the chat to anyone who's got ideas about materials and other types of fencing that we could use. Oh, great.
Okay.
Someone else was going to talk about wood crib walls. Yeah.
And
wood is a fun idea.
Joe Crawley's in the picture at the bottom right there, just so you all can see him.
Hi, Joe. And Joe's in the audience, I think, too.
Wood, we'd have to think about wood, but definitely getting engineers involved to look at the properties of the material is so important. Because Canada is such a severe environment with our freeze and thaw cycles that good luck.
Yeah.
That's why I like the barrier walls, if that's what we need. And I also like the idea of a combination. When you say barrier walls and you're looking at 2 kilometers, well, barrier walls, what we've seen is they're going up in the wetlands, and then you can use the chain link attached to them, right?
Yep. Now, Danielle Backman's talking about I-beam rails, and that's a good recycling. Great idea. So again, if you guys have questions, put them in the Q&A. So some standard concrete highway barriers, anything concrete concrete's great. It's just really expensive.
And it's expensive to deliver, but they have I don't know if people could talk to concrete. I actually phoned a Jersey barrier company and they gave me a quote.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as expensive as I thought. Yeah.
I've thought of some sort of telescopic fence because the snow loads just kill a lot of our fencing, and that frost, that heave haw, whatever it's called, the frost. I can't think right now, but the changes in the topography that happened because of the frost and thaw. So something telescopic that could clip into 2 ends of a wetland would be great. Like tent material, but turtles, snappers will rip that apart. I muse about this all the time, and I'm sure Carrie does as well.
I think we need to put a lot of these designs on sketches and have an in-person workshop and like go through them and have, people actually design stuff on paper. Yeah.
So some ideas are recycled concrete. Others are thicker materials instead of my tent material of tarps. What's it called? Canvas. I wonder even if wool, like a wool, what's it called? Like a thick wool would not, turtles might not be able to rip through that.
It's all about snow.
Yeah.
Snow removal.
Well, this is my telescopic idea of something you can take down and clip back up.
Oh, right. Yes, I do like that idea of.
Yeah, really difficult in terms of the footing and turtles getting under those areas. One engineer suggested to me that you do something telescopic on a buried track that can easily be cleaned out every spring. it's amazing when you get some road engineers together how they think about these things. So this man came up with an idea of a track, which was interesting.
Okay, I'm going to be back in 5.
Okay, so I'll answer one question that was geared to me. So one of the top questions was that I mentioned that turtles are keystone species in Ontario. What functions do they perform that makes them so important to ecosystems? So to answer that question, it's a bit of a long question. I'll try and simplify the science. So turtles are basically scavengers. And so younger turtles, the research shows that younger turtles, because they're growing, need more protein. And so as scavengers, they actually remove a lot of detritus or carcasses from wetlands and lakes that would produce pathogens. And so that's a really important function of turtles, especially snapping turtles are the best janitors for these lakes and wetlands. When turtles grow, they grow slower the older they are. And they move between different habitats, terrestrial and aquatic, through their territories. So they etch pathways in these territories that they follow annually. And as they move between aquatic and upland, the nutrients that they've taken in gets cycled. So they're transporters of essential nutrients between terrestrial and aquatic habitats. The older they grow, they use less, specifically phosphorus, and I think it's nitrogen, which would usually be in their bones. And so in their poop, as they're pooping along, they're leaving these important gifts of nutrient cycling. In addition to that, the older they grow, the science suggests that at least 60% of their diet as they're adults, and as they get even older, is plant material, seeds, etc. So as they ingest these seeds, part of their guts and the nutrients in their guts make these seeds viable, just like birds would. And so they're pooping out these seeds, essentially growing new wetland plants and fish nurseries. And so that function of what would have been a massive, I mean, turtles were ubiquitous and quite plentiful, and their declines have been more than 50%, at least we estimate at least 50% in the last 20 years. When I've talked to Indigenous elders, they talked about turtles readily walking through their yards or their front yards just all the time. And so if you can imagine that cycling of nutrients, that's quite important. But even today, the turtles we have remaining in these populations play these important transportation roles of nutrients and seeds. And so that's why they're really important. So they clean water of pathogens, at least they help to clean water of pathogens. So that's a really important function. And then this seed dispersal function means that they're basically at the base of many aquatic habitats. They are the janitors and they are the gardeners, essentially, of these aquatic habitats. So I hope that answers the question in basic terms. We've got lots of research that we've summarized in blogs, et cetera, on the turtleguardians.ca website about the role of turtles in ecosystems. So that's why they're keystone species. When you take that role away, some fish are scavenge as well, and some other aquatic species, but not many can compete with a really good snapping turtle in terms of the janitor role. And certainly the amount of travel that they do between these different parts of their territories and that transfer of nutrients is almost irreplaceable. And so without those things happening, without the gardeners and janitors of our wetlands, we will be in trouble. And that's their role in ecosystem. Okay, Carrie's back.
I was just reading some of the chat things, and you see all those rock walls in Ireland or on Amherst Island. Rock walls could work too.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Well, we used to build them all the time in the old days. Get all the students out there, all the people on that don't have a job can do it. We'll have to coordinate.
Right.
You and I, Liara.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Anything
All
to say?
right.
Okay.
Okay. So the next section is process for implementation. Have I done that? No, this is the last section, actually. And then after that, there's going to be a skill testing question to see if anybody has been thinking a little bit. And I'll get people to put their answer to that, I think, in the chat. And just we'll get a couple answers and we'll see if somebody gets it. And then after that, there's going to be one more brainstorming slide. And we can do a little bit of Q&A for let's say till 3:15. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
All right. So the process is a whole nother workshop as well. In Ontario, we are seeing, and everywhere else, we are seeing either grassroots led, which I love. And that's where I've actually learned how to install most of the exclusion fencing, through grassroots and through trials with companies that have approached me and want to trial, and such as Lior, pilot testing her metal. You know what I'm talking. I got a slide coming up on that. Anyway, so the grassroots is phenomenal. And I find that grassroots is really good for 500 meters and less, like the smaller projects. So if you're not doing massive, so you can get a group of rangers together, as I talk, the students together that are looking for a summer job or being paid through Canada Youth Employment, and you can get a bunch of them together and they can come and help you with shovels. You don't need machinery. So I love those kind of projects. They work well, the people care, so it gets done properly. We get funding from some of the habitat stewardship projects and funds, and we can also train people to install this at the same time. Hire contractors or some team of able bodies. That's kind of the able bodies is what I'm talking about. But also if the grassroots people learn how to do this, then they can also maintain the exclusion fencing afterwards, which until we figure that out, it needs to be maintained. So they have almost a share in the project. And so it's looked after. When the road agencies lead, which is fine for larger projects, it takes a lot longer, can take a lot longer depending on the money that needs to be and the design process and the road construction that's going on at the same time, if there's going to be. Typically with the road agency lead, you will have it identified, the project identified through the Endangered Species Act, which had more teeth prior to the previous government, with the previous government. Now we're not necessarily we're seeing a lot of things slip through the cracks. So we need people to really come up from the grassroots level and identify these and be on our governments to do something for these, for the turtles, because I've seen many projects where there's been a brand new, and I have a picture of a brand new big large culvert, and we know that turtles are there and being road killed, and then they didn't put the exclusion fencing, and we didn't need a lot of it, we just need a little bit. It was overlooked. So these are the kind of things we have to identify and be on top of. So when we have a provincially significant wetland, we need those identified so that we can say, hey, you can't do that there. And hopefully we advocate to the governments to keep that policy strong so that we can keep installing these kind of mitigation measures. And then with the road agency lead, typically a contractor bids on the job, whereas in the grassroots parks or Parks Canada, they may do it themselves. With their employees and their volunteer base. Friends of parks often help with those kind of projects. So those are the differences there. And you can see that this is two grassroots projects. This one's famous. This is Waterton. These are Parks Canada employees and their volunteers. This is what we did in Bruce Peninsula as well. And then school groups are great to get out. This one is in Prince Edward County. It's funded through provincial level HSP, and we installed about 8 of us installed 500 meters of fence in 3 or 4 days. And it's well installed and it will last quite a long time. And then you have your contractors who did the bigger jobs and the MTO highway, as you can see here. It's very important to have oversight on all of these jobs. On the grassroots jobs, I'm typically the oversight person, and so I beat people over the head with a hammer when they do it wrong. But you do need that, no doubt. So road agency lead, the process. So many of us practitioners consulting know this, but the grassroots people might not know this. And without knowing the process, and we don't really know how we can get it done. So it's important to understand the process and that what typically is happening. And maybe the process is too much sometimes. These are all things to consider. Maybe if you're just doing an exclusion fence, you don't need an engineering design company to come in so that's where the grassroots might be a little bit easier and quicker and less expensive. These are ways we can maybe save money and get these things done. So road agency lead is what they would do is they'll have tender the design to typically an engineering expertise that can do drawings. The drawings is the main thing. If you're looking at cross structures, you might need a hydrologist. If the crossing structure is existing, that's bonus. You don't need that necessarily that kind of engineering expertise. So then you develop a conceptual strategy, and the conceptual strategy is where you really need people to think through things. That Vermont example that I showed earlier was a conceptual strategy not done by road agency. They worked with the road agency. They had a person on there, but they actually had community people, but they had biologists from the community, and they had a road transportation guy from the state level that was able to feed into it. So they had a really good expertise from the community level, which you can find. So that's just an example. So that example, the Vermont example with that concrete block fence was done really, really, really well. And I'm going to go into that in one of our last slides here. The conceptual strategy is where you look at the whole landscape, connectivity, land use, and you try all those considerations that I went through this whole last hour and a half would be considered in that conceptual strategy. So you need to make sure you're looking at all those things. So you can see that you need some specialized expertise in that case to go through with detail. So make sure you put in a proper budget to go through all that detail so that you don't miss something. It's really important to keep that holistic approach to everything that's going on, and that you have the proper review throughout the process, because after conceptual strategy, it goes to detailed design, and detailed design is super important. That's where all the little details are drawn out on paper, and all the drawings go through several iterations, and you have all your experts review it, and you work with everybody you're consulting with, which is the road agency and the engineers, and etc. And then the tender stage is so important, and I didn't know a lot about it until the last couple of years. That is where it goes out to the people that are going to install it, put it in the ground. So you want those people to have experience that it goes out to, and you want to make sure your competitive process is competitive. So you don't just have a handful of companies that are bidding on it, and you want to make sure that they've maybe done this before. There's a lot of projects now, and people have done it before. So you want to make sure that that's happening in that process. So this is an example of a pre-conceptual strategy that I would draw up. This happened to be in New Brunswick, 3.2 kilometers of fence. There was obstacles that you had to go around. There was a cemetery, there was access roads, there was a bike trail. And so we had to go through many, many drawings of trying to, that's the bike path that I'm following. And then the fence went around cemeteries, so I had to go into the woods and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see how that held up. It was actually built in Couch-Bouge-Quack. I haven't been back for a couple of years, but they did have some snow damage on their fence, which is a big problem. I had no idea how much snow they had in New Brunswick, but they have a heck of a lot. But they had an integrated strategy of culverts, hydrology, and designated tunnels going together, and we integrated them all into the fencing design. Okay, so I put this big long list of how we can do better. I guess it's kind of a summary, and I'm going to go through some of these examples with illustrations. And I talked about the tendering process, supervising oversight with the contractors, quality control measures into the tender document. And what I mean there is ensure that if something goes wrong with the installation, it's not done properly, that there's 2 years of they have to come back and fix it kind of thing, because we haven't seen that up until this year. We're starting to see it. And time is so important. You might not get it in this year, so with all your permits and everything, so maybe it's 2 years, so don't go get ahead of yourself. Design the road project for wildlife mitigation measures. So the whole road project, everything. Use what's there, use the guide rails, use everything that you see. If there's an access point, integrate that, figure it out, and do the proper design. Because if you miss one thing, if you miss those nesting mounds or something, and then you maybe made it worse off for the turtle. So scientific research and development, we've already heard about. And there has to be opportunity for adaptive management. And this is a problem with everything we do with the environment. Adaptive management is supposed to be done, but it never is. And there's never money, and so we can't go in there and fix what was wrong after we've monitored. It just gets shelved. So we need to have those opportunities, and it's not going to work if we're trying to do HSP grants and go around and fix all of it. So we need to stop that right there and put it in right for starters. And if we don't, then we need to be able to get in there and fix it. And and again, if we have more trained people, the easier it is to do that. So this really is important, these drawings. You can see that these are 2 drawings I pulled for many projects that I've reviewed for guideline documents, and these are actually available on the internet, and I'll send the website for people that want to look at drawings. But you can see that there's a lot of detail in what needs to be done, so you want to make sure that those are followed. This is an example from the Vermont project, and if you look at these drawings that they drew up, there's the Moncton Wildlife Crossing project, and I think they hired a engineering company here to help them get these drawings out. But you can actually see on the ground what's portrayed here in the drawings, because it was just followed and done so well. So that's a before, and it actually looks like that after. So that's a good thing. They can be quite complicated. This is an example of a drawing from the Oresco project at Jackson Lake. And you can see that there is quite a bit of information and specifications for that wall that they built, and other things that needed to go with the wall, such as drainage. So we need to update, I talked about this, update and improve our standard drawings and guidelines. So the MTL is an awesome standard, but the fence end is not good, and that needs to be updated, and we need somebody internally to get on that and do that. It's been several years now. These fence ends need to be more flexible, definitely, and something that fits with the current research. Scientific research and development. We talked about this. Liara's picture talks 1,000 words. So she cut the food barrels in half, designed this on paper, and she took the lid and made the foot and welded rebar. And so that this slumping problem I was telling you about, it sits nicely in there. So that's a really, really good design. So now we just have to mass produce this, figure out a way to do that, and to make it accessible. And perhaps you only want to use this as where you want jump outs, because it's a jump out design. And what we say there is that because it's below grade, the animals can come up and they can pop over. So that's when the backfill is in. And you can see that there's not a ton of riprap there, and there's only topsoil, so she should be okay for slumping. And so she's going to test that this winter with her people. And this is a missed opportunity, and it's really, really sad. Because when you spend all that money putting in this beautiful crossing structure, a beautiful wetland and a very busy road that all the cottagers travel, and you didn't get that little bit of fencing that you just need along here to include along the wetland for the turtles that are nesting, that are coming up here, then it's a darn shame. So now we got to go back to the county who have already, Simcoe County has already installed exclusion fencing. So they know about it. So we got to go back and beg, and hopefully we can get some exclusion fencing in there in a year or two. Now, so we got Animex, who is leading the edge on innovation. They've come up, they're going to be coming, stay tuned for some new designs with aluminum. And I hope I got the material right. Preform freestanding. Anyway, I think it's aluminum. And this is an example of an installation in Europe, not with this specific design, but another similar design. So there's a lot of things to learn from if we go to Europe and we see what they're doing over there. I have an idea that I want to work with a whole bunch of partners, because it's not my idea. They did this in Australia. It's a floating nesting beach for turtles, and it's a warmer climate there. I don't know if it would work here with our colder water. Paul Johansson brought that up. So there's all these kind of things to think about, but wouldn't it be neat if we could have a floating nest, and then the poachers can't get at it, but also raccoons might be less, I guess, able to get to these floating, but there's also logistics, because you have to have the weight and the load to get the stuff in there after you build the sandbox, or what, so to speak. So these are kind of things that we get so much money, but we have to install these things so quick. We just pour sand on the ground, and we don't really think about how we can do these things better collaboratively. We have to work as a collaboration. So stay tuned. A lot of the guidelines I went through today are going to be featured in an upcoming guidelines document with at the federal level, with Paul Johansson and Ewan Eberhardt that are leading this. And there will be a chapter on turtle nest and protection mitigation, because that's being used more and more by nonprofits all over Ontario. And so we need to write that up. But also there's a bunch of stuff on exclusion fencing and crossing structures that we've already talked about. And so this is a skill testing question. And I would like people to look at this and put in the chat box right now, what is wrong with this picture? And let me know. This is actually an installation in Australia. What do you think is wrong with this picture, generally speaking? If you were evaluating this, if you went out in the field?
So, Kara, I can read you some answers. So, motorist behavior modification, speed limit reduction, raccoons swim. Large
No, that was for the before, yeah.
Okay, large animals can get out. It looks dark. The fence is only as effective as the jump off. They can climb the sides. Again, too dark. The fence is climbable. It looks like people are walking over it. Too low. Large animals, again, can jump out. The height may be too low. Free meal for predators. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
The opening is problematic. It opens up where there's still cars. It's too short, things could crawl over. Jump out lower than barrier height. Too much vegetation. That's a good answer too. It looks low, too dark. The entrance is not in line with the directional fence.
That's good detail.
And the fence is missing on the other side of the road.
That's good.
Metal gets hot, no guiding fencing. It doesn't funnel the reptile to the crossing site. No ramp for jump off properly. So, what do you want to answer this question, Carrie, for everyone?
Yeah, no, that's a good summary. I'll start with the raccoon swimming part. I know they swim. I'm just hoping it might deter them. I've seen them in water a lot, but yeah, I don't, it's something to look at. Okay, now back to this. The main thing is, the first thing I would say, the primary problem is that this opening, I would have just kept the fence going over here, over the top of this, kept this chain link and maybe cut it, which is what they did in Presqu'île. They cut it, the fence to fit, and they went over top. Because smaller mammals, maybe amphibians can't, but some can jump. They would get over that, and they won't use the tunnel. So that's the primary thing. The other thing about what people were saying with the other little detail things are all of value. Definitely. It does look dark. And in this particular circumstance, they had to integrate a sidewalk in there. So they put asphalt. It should be open top, and maybe along the road it's open. It's at grade. So that's a little bit of a problem. Yeah, but if it was open top, it would be much better with the sunlight coming in. And you don't necessarily need this cover on the ACO tunnels. A lot of times you see that cover, and that's what makes it dark at the entering it. You can go without, and then it would be more flush with the fence if you took this cover off. That cover has a little, I think they're redesigning this now, where they took this panel out from the middle, because it was for amphibians, but that doesn't allow larger animals like turtles to go through if you have that panel there. So that's something to think about. And then the vegetation should be cleared, but that's actually not bad. Some of ours get really, really overgrown, as you saw, especially if there's frag there. David Seaburn raised his hand. Dave, you could talk if you want to. Are they allowed to take their?
You're muted. You can unmute yourself, Dave, because you're obviously special. So you get to unmute yourself.
Yes, please.
So he said it was a mistake that he raised his hand. So
oh well, we'll forgive you. Somebody else raised their hand.
I think that was also a mistake.
Okay.
So is this the end of the session, or we got a few more slides?
Okay, there might be one more brainstorming slide here. Hold on. Oh, it's a thank you slide.
Okay.
All the people that contributed their stories from colleagues, a lot of these photos might not have had your credit on it. So I just wanted to say thank you. I tried to mention the people that helped me in the last couple of weeks that I've phoned to put this together. And I wonder if there's.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about it, Leah. Are there other questions?
We're gonna put some of the brainstorming questions in the survey that you'll get tomorrow in the webinar recording. I just want to share the poll results with you.
Okay. And then if you want to do Q&A, if anybody wants to stay later, they can.
Yeah, now I don't know if the polls, so I'll just read them out. We've got 8% from the federal government for conservation. We've got 2% Indigenous First Nation communities represented here today, 21% provincial government, and 5% from the province that's involved in infrastructure. 9% are from the municipalities, and NGOs 24%. We've got 17% from the public, students or educational institutions, and 15% consulting. So that's a great spread of the audience. And we've got 86% are from Canada, 11% from the US today, 1% from Mexico, and 1% from Europe, France, England, Germany, and then 2% from another part of the world. So really dynamic. It's clearly a really important topic today. And for those, because we've got such and 30% don't have any experience in mitigation for turtles on roads or any experience whatsoever. And so for those people, we just want to cover why turtles need to cross the road. Because I've had many volunteers that say just use exclusion fencing. So the turtle shouldn't be on the road. Don't let it on the road. It doesn't need to cross the road. Well, that's not quite true. So turtles, as I have high brain plasticity when they're very young, and that brain plasticity curtails very dramatically after about the age of 4 or 5. So in the first few years of the turtle's life, and I'm talking about terrestrial turtles, they're etching pathways in their brain effectively. And they're etching pathways to the different parts of a territory that they will use for the rest of their lives. And part of that territory are the hibernation sites. Hibernation sites are often very different than feeding sites. Hibernation sites have very specific requirements in terms of ice cover and oxygen levels, water quality for a turtle to survive. And to access those hibernation sites is really important. Now, when wetlands are removed, turtles will adapt, but turtles don't adapt well to being relocated. Very difficult for them to remember or etch new pathways. And so that's why turtles are not crossing roads. The roads are crossing the turtle habitat. So they are also very stubborn and will do whatever they can to get across that road. Often, if you design an exclusion or a fencing underpass infrastructure and you have one little mistake, whether it be a driveway through a private driveway that interrupts the whole fencing mechanism, or a hole in the fence, turtles, or the ends not being arched back further enough, or not bounding the wetland entirely. So turtles mainly like to be wet and they feel more comfortable in water. And I'm just generalizing across species here. So if we're generalizing, if you haven't bound the habitat well enough, and there's an open end of a wetland, or there's a hole in the fence and they get on the road and the jump out isn't working, turtles can go back and forth between the two ends of the fence, and you can actually create a real problem for turtles. So you're actually creating a trap, a death zone for turtles that was worse than before. Populations can become locally extinct. This is really important for municipalities to understand. If too many wetlands are filled in and there's turtles end up hibernating together in whatever remaining sites, if the water level changes or someone fills in that wetland, you can actually create local extinctions. So these are much more sophisticated projects than may appear on the surface, and they're much more sophisticated animals and essential animals to our future health and well-being on this planet. So this is why we put this together today, and I want to thank Carrie for all the information. That's a lot of experience over many years distilled into 2 hours, and you can see there's a lot of meat in each of those topics. So for Carrie to distill something that, each one of the sort of sections we could have discussed, or Carrie could have discussed each for an hour, whether it is materials, whether it's jump outs, etc. So again, this is why it's really important for public works to work with NGOs or biologists who have some background in turtle ecology biology, and to design these things properly. And we work for a dime. So we can leverage volunteers. There's lots of good grassroots ways to get things done. So I'm going to go through the Q&A, Carrie, quickly.
Yeah, I'm answering some of them by typing in.
We'll do the top questions. So one of the favored questions is, you mentioned that turtles are, has constructing artificial turtle nesting habitats away from roads ever been experimented? And yes, the answer is yes. Maybe Carrie can expand on that.
Away from roads?
That's right.
Nesting mounds?
Yeah. Nesting mounds away from the shoulders of the road.
Yeah, so that's kind of the study design that we should do, is put nesting mounds close to roads and put nesting mounds closer to wetlands, just understanding where they're moving from. Like we try and understand this first, the nesting, where the turtles are moving. And in most cases we know because there's been some kind of monitoring by Turtles Kingston or another nonprofit or university student or whatever. So we already know kind of where they're going, or we can get a sense of it from looking at the Google aerials and things like that. So then we can strategically put them where we think they're going, because that's important, because they're going to go back to the same spot they went the year before. And most of the time that's on top of a road. And but the issues with that is private property. If the property is owned by somebody else, then you have to get permission. And I mean, that just takes a little extra effort, but definitely, maybe 50% of property owners would be happy to do something like that.
There is a level of nest site fidelity or loyalty to their nest sites, but they will adjust if there's a preferred site within their pathway. And I think Parks Canada has done some research on that. But to answer that question too, Carrie's talking about private property. There's also very specific requirements for nest sites, so that they have to be open and unshaded for a turtle to prefer those. And that also poses a problem for erosion if in a flood zone.
Yeah.
So how do you secure those nest sites? So there's lots, again, every answer it's never as simple as you think it is. And every site will be different because of the topography and the turtle using that site, where that turtle is usually traveling from and to. Okay, then another question. Can you speak more about the importance of airflow or light in encouraging movement through underpasses, as this relates to underpass temperature? Is there a specific threshold for temperature, light, or airflow needed to promote passage through underpasses?
Temperature?
Yeah, temperature, the airflow and light related to regulating.
I think so.
Regulating the temperature. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's research that have alluded to that. And so we need more rigorous studies to look at those kind of parameters. So definitely a lot of research there to why are turtles more apt to go through than snakes, for example, when they're both cold-blooded. And maybe, a herpetologist would be a person to start looking into that and helping set up a study design. Definitely, the more open, the better. And we're having problems with that, with herps. Herps are definitely been a challenge for road ecology.
Yeah, they are so tied to the environment in terms of temperature and moisture. And there's new studies out about barometric pressure changing their nesting habitats. So it's incredibly how they are, as in some indigenous people have told me, they are representative of all of the earth. They are so connected to the earth, and they represent all the laws of the earth, that of course temperature, light, all those things do play a part. It'd be interesting so the more I think it is like the outside conditions and underpass, the better. Road salt concerns, Carrie. Can you talk about road salt concerns with some of these structures?
With the structures, not so much, just that road salt is a big problem. And that's a whole nother ballgame. That's water quality. And it's huge. And there's lots of research to show that it affects the aquatic ecosystem and the animals that live there, for sure.
Yeah, so maybe that's what Paula meant, and not just the structures. Yeah, road salt is lethal for so many reasons. But in terms of structures, I mean, our structures will rust out sooner because of road salt. That's what I can tell you. And concrete spalls or can fracture if it's reinforced because of salt. But Carrie's absolutely right. It's lethal, in many studies about road salt. And there are alternatives used in some communities across Ontario that use hops, actually, like beer hops. It's pretty interesting. Okay. So another question, how can we work with beavers instead of against them when we're trying to keep underpasses clear?
Beavers we're still working on that. It's all new, new, I guess, concepts going in there for integrating that with road ecology. So the best, it's hard not to describe it without a picture, but we need to get rid of the grate. So if you get rid of the grate, then what are you going to do? So we do trapezoidal fences, or we do diversionary dams around the culvert to protect the culvert. And within those structures, you need to build in turtle passage and keep the beavers out. Keep in mind, beavers work in water, they have sticks, so they need more room than turtles do to simply swim. They need room they're very busy and hardcore, and they won't give up. So they'll try and get sticks through anything, but you might deter them. So that's the idea, is to work with the beaver. And so you take the trapezoidal fence a little bit further. If you have exclusion fence, you keep it 1 meter away from the exclusion fence upland, where the trapezoidal fence around the culvert ends. So you have that gap. If you have that gap, that's where the turtles can get in and access the culvert. That's the main way. Or the diversionary dam, if it's kept just at water level, turtles should be able to get just over top of the diversionary dam.
Yeah. Those diversionary dams are wonderful. They do work nicely. The next question was how you get involved in citizen science. So anyone involved in turtles usually has a citizen science arm or a community science arm. So the Turtle Guardians, we have about 7 different ways to volunteer and monitor turtles. We've got wetland watchers, road researchers, nest sitters, turtle crossing guards, and tunnel assessors. And so we've got these kinds of things. Kerry has Wildlife on Roads operating in Norfolk, and we're going to be partnering with Kerry to bring Turtle Guardian stuff to Southern Ontario in the Carolinian zone. I know Scales Nature Park has volunteers as well. Magnetowan, Georgian Bay Biosphere, all of us have different community science programs. So in your area, you can just Google or you can just email us at Turtle Guardians, and we can set you up. If we're not covering that area, we can link you to who covers that area for community science. So that's a great question. Road salt was another. Train tracks, a large concern, as well as roads. Yeah, definitely. There's lots of ways turtles can get killed. And so, Carrie, we can talk about train tracks maybe another time. And other threats to turtles in terms of infrastructure. Maybe we'll cover that in another session because the time is ticking. Also, people have asked for the names of studies. So we're going to ask you to share any studies you're familiar with in the survey that you'll be sent tomorrow. And we will again answer these questions and share the studies we have with you in a document back to you. So I think that covers most of the main questions. The recommended gap size, though, for fencing, mesh or wire that can be used for snake exclusion to prevent movement of all sizes. Can you tell us about that quickly, Carrie?
Sorry, say that again. I was just reading another question.
Oh, the gap size for fencing for snakes to make sure that no snakes get killed through fences.
So when you saw that, like the Animex had separated a little bit with the plastic pieces, I would go in there and I would tie them. Any gap is bad. And I would put in like, they have plastic ties or metal ties, and I would just make that snug. Or I would take rock and I would build up the rock. So those are the kind of maintenance and evaluation you need to do. Every gap is bad for snakes. That's why they're so difficult.
Okay.
And think of if it's the size of a snake can get through.
And so the next answer you were busy typing away at, it's the difference between mesh, like see-through or opaque fencing, and how an animal interacts with that. Can you just speak to that quickly?
Yes, so definitely solid. The research is showing that they will not climb because they can't see through. they can't smell, they can't see through the fence. The fence provides shade, so they might rest, and that's good. But and you could have cover objects as well, so that they don't dehydrate for long sections of fence. So there's a study in California that looked at this, and I guess movement time along a section of fence that was transparent mesh versus solid. And they found some statistical difference. I'm just looking it up. It's Bremy, so I can attach it. Bremy, California fence end. She actually looked at fence end stuff as well.
Okay, and then a question about Animex or plastic fencing and how it stands up to harsh weather conditions, fluctuating water levels, and snow removal. So these fences do have challenges in the snow. Snow load is a big issue in Ontario, and that's why we're trying all kinds of things. Carrie, do you have more to answer to that?
Snow load?
Yeah, harsh weather and snow load for the plastic fencing.
It's snow load is a problem, so that's why you have to think about it for all of the fencing. So you have to keep your road allowance suitable. The further, the better, obviously. And Animex has some specialized installation guidelines for areas where you want to, you can't move away from that snow impact enough. And that some of that's more of a below grade install, below grade because the snow kind of goes over. The higher, the more height on top of the ground is more impact from the snow. So you have to definitely think about that. And so that's why we have the cross wires, the farm fence. If you attach it to something, then you just have that stability when the snow hits it. And that's so important. Okay, so a freestanding fence with plastic, you want to attach it to something for stability.
And we've got about 2 more minutes before the end at 3:30 for the Q&A. So someone's asking if turtles went back to the safe side and got flipped on their carapace. I'm guessing that's with jump outs or that kind of thing. Quick comment maybe that that it's always important to think like a turtle and make it turtle friendly. And so, big drops are not necessarily a good thing. Carrie, do you have anything to add to that? And then there's one more question we'll answer after that.
Okay, that was kind of long. You lost me halfway through.
It was just, so someone had experiences with turtles being flipped on their carapace and I'm guessing it's from a jump out or something like that. Okay.
So that's an example of harassment and things like that. When that's higher probability at these fences and crossing structures. So I actually said turtle guardians. More turtle guardians, people watching out for them.
Yeah, monitoring is really important. And also if you look at topography and if they're jumping out on an angle that they can roll, turtles roll really well. Right. So that's a good way to resolve that, to make sure that it just, I heard
they can flip over.
They can flip over, especially if there's an angle for them, if they can leverage. So that's important. Another question was about using trail cameras to monitor. Now, Carrie answered that question in our first session. So that's available through Turtle Guardians YouTube. So if you just go to the Turtle Guardians website, you can get the answers about the trail cam specs. And I think the rest we've sort of answered through this, but we'll send you answers then. Again, if you would support our projects to try the jump out barrel fencing, we're hoping to do 15 sites if it works this winter and next year. You can buy our Turtle Guardian calendar, and just because it's fun, so go to the Turtle Guardians website. You will see there soon too. This morning we're actually protesting against a wetland being filled in with one of the oldest turtles or largest turtles we found in Haliburton County. It likely hibernates in this wetland and there don't seem to be enough controls. So if you want to sign our petition, you'll see that going on our website. And if you want to help us protest the filling of this wetland, that would be great too. So I want to thank everyone for attending and Carrie for all the work putting this together. If you have suggestions for more detailed, specific focus workshops with Carrie's knowledge in the future, again, there's opportunities for you to tell us that you just, maybe you just want something focused entirely on barrier walls. Just let us know. So thank you for your attendance, and turtle on. Have a Have a great day and keep up all the good work everyone's doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.